So in this point in the lecture, what we're going to go ahead and do is we're going to create what's referred to as an area. Areas allow you to divide your application up into unique, somewhat isolated components. By defining an area, you are in essence defining kind of a subsection of your application, and you're resetting the MVC structure. So currently in our root website, we have our controllers, our models, and our view folders here off the root of our site. If we go in and we add a new area, and we're going to call this area admins, we go add area, and we're right clicking on the project itself and choosing add and then choosing area. And we get a pop-up that asks us for the name of our area, so we'll say admin. And we'll notice that when Visual Studio scaffolds out that new area, what it does is it creates a folder called areas, and then inside of it creates a folder called admin, which is the name of our area. Inside of that folder, we actually end up with a new controllers, models, and view folder. This view folder has the default shared and web configs, and then it has this file called an admin area registration.cs. This class inherits from the area registration class, which comes from the MVC framework itself. It's under system.web.mvc, if you're curious. And it includes the area name as well as a route config for our area. Now, some of this route config detail may look a little foreign to you. We'll be covering this in later weeks. So this kind of carves out this area for us. So we now have an area where we can define our own controllers, additional models, and views that are completely isolated and separate from the root MVC structure. Now, you can still utilize elements from the root MVC structure, but you also are now kind of in this separate space, so you can create your own controllers, additional models, and views. So to redirect to that admin area, what we're actually going to do is we're going to look at our overload options for redirect to action, and you'll notice that it says that we can pass an action name, route values, action name and controller name, or we can pass action name, controller name, and route values. So obviously first thing we need is a controller to actually redirect to, and I'm going to go ahead and call this class, right click, add, and we're going to call this controller our new home controller. So under areas, under our admin area, we can have a home controller. And then under our admin area registration, I'm going to say controller equals home. And what this is going to allow us to do is say that our default controller is the home controller and our default action is the index action. So these two sections will be our default spaces. Now, because this is the admin area, I want people to have to log in and authenticate into this space. Not just anyone can have access. So on the controller itself, I'm going to add an authorize attribute. And inside of that authorize attribute, I'm going to say roles equals admin. And what that tells MVC is only users with an admin role are allowed to access this home controller. Now, back underneath the student controller in the login space, we're going to redirect to the index action on the home controller, and then under route values, we're going to say new area equals admin. And that is all the details that we need to provide in order for our redirect to take us to the admin area with the home controller and the index action. If we F6 to recompile, everything looks good. Now there's one last thing that we need to do before we run this change. Under the global.asax, I've carved out a new method called application_authenticate request. Now this method name is a reserved name that is used by the ASP.NET framework, and anything that's underneath the global.asax.cs are methods that are globally accessible to the entire ASP.NET application. Now, application authenticate request in particular is called upon every request, and it allows you the opportunity to trigger an authentication setup for your user. Now, what this is mainly used for is when a user is logged in and a request comes in from that logged in user, this step allows you to prepare or load the user object that will be within the HTTP context for the rest of the request. So this is the first stop the request makes before it even goes to the controller. And why is this important? This is important because it gives us an opportunity to inject our roles into the user object. So how do we do that? Well, we're going to need an iSecurity utility, or I'm sorry, repository. And we'll call it the SEC repo. And we'll take our repository engine and we'll get a repository for iSecurity repository. And then we'll have the SEC repo dot get user. And we're going to pull the user from context dot user dot identity dot name. And we're going to do a quick check before we get there. So we're going to say if application dot our request dot is authenticated, do these steps. So if the user is logged in, do these steps. And this will be our user. And we'll say if user does not equal null, meaning that they exist, then we will modify the context.user. And this is a iPrinciple type. Now, there's a generic principal that exists within the system.security.principal namespace. And just a generic principal. And the principal takes two things. It takes an identity and a string array of roles. So the identity, we can use new system.security.principal.generic identity. And this identity itself only takes a name. So then we can say here, we can say context.user.identity.name. We'll use the same name again. And that will generate our identity. And then the second parameter is roles. And here we'll say user.roles.select. And these are just strings. So we'll say user.roles.select, and then from our role, we'll say role.name. And what this is going to do for us is this will extract role names assigned to the user. And this will create the identity for the user. And everything gets packaged up inside of that principal. And we'll need to make this a .to array. Great, so now we've had that opportunity to kind of inject the roles into the user object for the request. So now if we F6 and F5, the application will come up to the login. We'll go ahead and just test our student login again since we've made some modifications. And that login is successful. It now takes us to the scheduler page. So we're able to come in here and we can add courses to our course requests, as well as remove them. But what we want to access is we want to access the admin area. Now to do that we need to log in. Now we don't have users currently defined in our user table, so let's jump in there and we'll create a user. And we'll give them the username of admin and the password of password and no student ID. And I neglected to set my identity field on my user table. So let's right click and say open table definition. And on ID, I want to come over here and set my identity. And then we'll update the table. Perfect. And then we'll go ahead and recommit that and refresh. And there's our admin user. And then we also need to set up our roles, and I'm sure I need to set up my identity on this one as well. So we'll say that is true, is an identity, update. And then from the roles table, we'll add a role of admin. Now, just to kind of remove any confusion, let me jump back into my users table, and I'm going to call this an admin user. And then under user roles, we have to set that relationship. So this is a many to many. So we'll set both those keys. And now we can come back and we can log in as our admin user with a password of password. And upon we are redirected to the index action on our home controller, but unfortunately we don't actually have a view set up. So not too bad. So if we flip back here, we can go to our admin controller. We'll stop debug. And under areas admin home controller, we will right click and say add view. And this is not a partial view. This will currently be an empty view. And we'll go ahead and use the default page layout, and what that's going to do is pull it from our root. And we'll just change that to index, fix my casing here, and we'll say something like welcome admin, and then we can actually say user.identity.name just to kind of customize it. So F6, F5, and we're already logged in, so this should reload directly on the admin page, and there's our welcome. So we now have authentication set up, we've created a new area, and now we can move forward to begin building our admin area to manage both courses, students, and their course requests.